Most people think a bad relationship with money just means a low bank balance. But it's actually a domino effect that slowly touches your health, your marriage, and even your freedom. If you don't fix the root cause today, here is exactly what your life will look like in 10 years. Here's the thing. In 10 years, you might be earning almost double what you make right now, and you'll still feel behind. Somewhere in this video is a number that explains why a raise can make you feel worse, not better, and a small shift in thinking that quietly changes how your entire nervous system relates to a paycheck. Stick around, because most people never connect these dots until it's already cost them something. Now look, before we get into the 10-year version of your life, I want to explain why this even happens, because it's not really about income. It's about a gap. Not the gap between what you earn and what you spend, the gap between what you earn and what you feel like you're supposed to have. My name is Ely, and I spend way too much time thinking about how people in the US experience money psychologically. If you're someone who earns a normal income, maybe even more than you used to, but still doesn't feel financially secure, hit subscribe and give this video a thumbs up, because this channel exists for exactly that feeling. Not the people who are broke and know it. The people who look fine on paper and still lie awake doing math in their head. Here's what most people don't realize. The Federal Reserve Survey of Household Economics found that a large share of American adults, even those making solid incomes, say they would struggle to cover an unexpected $400 expense without borrowing or selling something. That statistic doesn't move much even in years when wages are rising, because the problem isn't the number on the paycheck. It's what happens to that number the second it hits your account. Rent goes up. The car payment creeps up because the loan was refinanced during high-interest years. Groceries cost more than they did 3 years ago, and the Bureau of Labor Statistics has tracked that grocery and housing inflation outpaced wage growth for a meaningful stretch of the last several years. So the raise you got last year already left the building before you noticed it arrived. Now you might be thinking, okay, but that's just inflation. That's not psychology, that's math. And you're right, it starts as math. But here's where it gets interesting. The math creates a feeling, and the feeling starts making your decisions for you. Once someone feels behind, even slightly, they don't respond with more discipline. They respond with more spending, because spending is the fastest way to feel in control again. A candle, a new pair of shoes, a nicer dinner out, none of that is the problem on its own. The problem is that it becomes a coping mechanism disguised as a reward. Psychologists call this a form of emotional regulation, and the American Psychological Association has repeatedly found that money is consistently one of the top reported sources of stress for adults in this country, year after year, regardless of what the economy is doing. So let's actually walk through the 10-year version of a life where this never gets addressed. Picture someone making $50,000 today, stressed, but managing. 10 years from now, they're making $75,000. On paper, that sounds like real progress. But the rent that used to be $1,200 is now $1,900. The car that used to cost $400 a month now costs $600 because it got replaced somewhere along the way with something a little nicer, a little more deserved. Healthcare costs more. Everything costs more. And the lifestyle quietly expanded to match the identity of someone who finally made it. Someone who worked hard and earned the right to stop being so careful. That person isn't reckless. That person is human. But 10 years later, they are earning 50% more and feeling exactly as stressed, sometimes more stressed, because now there's more to lose in a mortgage or a family depending on the number staying stable. Now stretch that same pattern across an entire decade of small decisions, and it starts to look less like bad luck and more like a quiet default setting. The credit card that got paid off during a good month gets used again during a rough one, not out of carelessness, but because it's the fastest way to keep life feeling normal when something unexpected shows up: a car repair, a dental bill, a flight home for a family emergency. Each of those moments feels isolated at the time. Nobody sits down and decides to stay stressed for 10 years. It happens one reasonable-sounding decision at a time, and that's exactly what makes it so hard to catch, because at no single point does it feel like a mistake. It just feels like life. And this is where the 10-year picture gets a little heavier, because it's not only about the bank account. It's about the version of yourself that gets built around it. Someone who spends a decade feeling quietly behind tends to make decisions from scarcity, even in moments that have nothing to do with money, holding back in a relationship, avoiding a career risk that could have paid off, staying in a job that drains them, because leaving feels too unstable to consider. The stress doesn't stay contained to a bank statement. It leaks into confidence, into patience, into how much bandwidth is left over for the people closest to you at the end of a long day. This is where it gets interesting, because the real damage isn't even financial yet. It's what constant, low-grade money stress does to everything around it. There's research connecting chronic financial stress to disrupted sleep, tension in relationships, and lower reported relationship satisfaction, because money is one of the most common things couples argue about. Not because either person is bad with money, but because money represents different things to different people. To one partner, it might represent safety. To the other, it might represent freedom, or being seen as capable, or simply not repeating what their own parents struggled with. When two different meanings collide under stress, small disagreements about a grocery bill turn into something that feels much bigger because it was never really about the groceries. If this is starting to feel familiar, that's exactly why I make these videos. Hit subscribe so you don't miss the next one, because we're about to get into the part almost nobody talks about, which is why this cycle is so hard to break even when someone genuinely wants to fix it. Here's the uncomfortable part. Most people don't have a spending problem. They have a threshold problem. Everyone has an internal number where they start to feel safe, and that number almost never comes from logic. It comes from comparison. Not necessarily comparing yourself to a stranger online, though that certainly doesn't help, but comparing yourself to where you thought you'd be by now, or to a sibling, a coworker, or the version of your own life you imagined at 22. The problem with a threshold built on comparison is that it moves. The moment you reach it, it resets slightly higher, because the people around you are usually moving too. This is sometimes described as lifestyle creep, but that phrase makes it sound like a spending habit. It's closer to a moving target that your brain keeps redrawing so that safety always stays just out of reach. Now here's the math and the psychology colliding at the same time, because this is the part that actually explains everything. Say someone gets a $10,000 raise. Simple math says that's $10,000 of breathing room. But psychologically, a raise doesn't feel like breathing room. It feels like permission. Permission to finally get the car they've been eyeing, to finally take the trip, to finally stop feeling behind. And there's nothing wrong with any single one of those choices in isolation. The problem is the pattern. Every raise gets mentally spent on catching up to an old feeling of deprivation before it ever gets the chance to build actual security. So the income rises, the stress stays flat, and 10 years pass with nothing structurally different underneath, just a nicer version of the same anxiety. This is also why simply telling someone to make a budget rarely works long-term, and honestly, that's the part that used to frustrate me most about typical financial advice. A budget addresses the math. It does almost nothing for the threshold. You can build the most detailed spreadsheet in the world, and it will not fix the underlying belief that having money means you're supposed to look a certain way, live a certain way, or finally relax once you hit some imaginary number. That belief has to be interrupted directly, not outspent. So what actually breaks this cycle? The first shift is separating identity from income. Your worth was never actually tied to the number in your account, even though nearly everyone in this country has been quietly taught to feel that way through comparison, marketing, and social pressure. That's not a slogan. It's a practical tool. Because the moment spending stops being about proving something and starts being about function, the decisions get dramatically easier to make. The second shift is building what's sometimes called a buffer instead of a lifestyle. Before increasing spending after a raise, the goal is to increase the gap first. Even something as unremarkable as saving half of any raise before adjusting spending starts to rebuild an actual sense of safety, the kind that isn't dependent on the next paycheck landing on time. That gap, even a modest one, is what turns income into actual security instead of just a slightly nicer version of the same tightrope. The third shift is naming the comparison instead of absorbing it silently. When you notice yourself wanting something because someone else has it, just naming that out loud, even quietly to yourself, takes an enormous amount of its power away. Most overspending isn't really about the object. It's about an unspoken story running in the background, and stories lose most of their grip the moment you say them out loud. There's a fourth shift too, and it's the one people usually skip because it feels less urgent than the others, and that's building a slow, boring emergency cushion before anything else. Not a dramatic 6-month fund overnight, just enough to cover that $400 surprise the Fed keeps flagging. So a flat tire or a broken appliance doesn't turn into a spiral of debt and shame. That small buffer changes the entire emotional texture of daily decisions. Because most financial anxiety isn't really about the big future. It's about how exposed today feels. Even $1,000 set aside can quiet a surprising amount of that background noise. Not because it solves everything, but because it removes the constant low-level bracing for the next unexpected bill. None of this means never enjoying money or treating every purchase like a moral failure, because that swings just as hard in the wrong direction and creates its own kind of stress. This is about noticing which purchases are functional or genuinely joyful, and which ones are just quiet attempts to outrun a feeling. Once you can tell the difference, the anxiety around money starts to lose its grip, not because the number magically got bigger, but because the relationship underneath it finally changed. So here's the actual choice in front of you. 10 years from now, you're going to be earning more than you are today. That part is likely, especially if you're already someone who thinks seriously about this stuff. The only real question is whether that extra income buys you an actual sense of stability or just a more expensive version of the same stress you're carrying right now. That decision isn't made in some dramatic future moment. It's made in the small, boring choices happening this month, the ones that don't feel significant at the time. Fix the relationship with money now, while it's still a quiet adjustment, and not later, when it's a much harder habit to unlearn.